Hey, you're listening to Beyond the Session, the show where we spill all of our therapy secrets and expect nothing in return. And sometimes we get free therapy. I thought this was a good ChatGPT tagline for today. It said, "Join us in the therapy room where no thought goes unspoken and no topic is off limits." I like how it assumes we're so edgy.
Yeah, it has a very taboo feel to it.
I've got Andi Atkins in the studio today, and we're cracking into the very big topic of relationships. Now, to clarify, this isn't a show about romantic relationships alone, although that is obviously one of the types of relationships we experience. We're talking about how all human relationships can contribute to and potentially mess with our mental health at work, at home, in your family. We're diving into the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between. Now, the reason I've got Andi here today is because Andi is no stranger to relationships. She grew up as the youngest of 7 children. She's a mom, she's a wife, she's got therapeutic relationships she needs to juggle, as well as friendships and acquaintances, I'm sure. So, Andi, we're just going to call you the relationship guru today. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
I'm not going to make you dive into the good, the bad, the ugly in your relationships, Andi. I don't think that's fair. But I do want to talk to you about how you bring that into the therapy room. Let's talk generally big picture about, as humans, how we emphasize the importance of healthy relationships in promoting overall mental health and well-being.
Well, I think that the very foundation of therapy goes to show how important relationships are to people, right? It's this idea, not that, we are incomplete on our own or that we are weak on our own or anything like that. But I mean, we are mammals. Our nervous system interacts with the nervous system of other people. I think that that is something that we focus on, or I at least focus on a lot in sessions. I think having a support network, having a social network, having even a few people, often it is about quality over quantity, but even having a few people that you feel safe with or that you're able to just vent to or get some advice from or bounce some ideas off. And sometimes it's nice to have a couple people because people have their strengths as well in the way that they are able to support us.
Right. And the reality is, even if we prefer our solitude, let's say, the reality is in our life, we're going to be faced with relationships. Even if it's the people that we see at the bank, there's different levels of relationships. And sooner or later, we're going to have to interact with other people, whether they're close to us or not. We can kind of explore that today, the different levels of the relationships that we have with people and the way that we're interacting with them, how those interactions can affect our mental health. So my practicum supervisor, actually, she uses a tool with her clients, and it's basically concentric circle. Picture a dartboard, right? You've got the circles coming out from the middle. What she does with her clients is she gets them to sit down sometimes and recognize the different levels of relationships that they have. So in this example, at that bullseye in the middle of that circle is you. And then you've got the people who are in your inner circle, basically. Here are the people that I'm closest with, that I trust with, my deepest secrets, that I would go to if I was having some kind of a crisis. So those people at the very middle. And then if you take a step out, here are people that I hang out with sometimes, that I have conversations with. We have things in common. And you're stepping out again into the next circle out. Here are people that I have regular interactions with, but I don't necessarily share my deepest secrets with. If you step out from that, here are people, you're not even acquaintances so much, but it's, the people that I see at the grocery store once a week. And they're in my life regularly. But again, I don't have a very close relationship with them. There's varying degrees of closeness in our relationships. I think that exercise can be helpful in establishing, here are the people that I really want to spend my energy on building relationships with, right?
So what you're speaking to is kind of this idea that not all relationships are created equal, and neither should they be equal. And I think to add to that, it's important to note that it is normal and healthy for those relationships to change over time. If we're looking at it from a developmental perspective, when we start out as babies, as children, our family is the primary social unit, right? We've maybe got some other, we have teachers, friends, babysitters, things like that. But it's really our family, and especially the parental figures, whatever that looks like. And then as we get older, especially as you move into the teenage years, as much as, it drives a lot of parents and probably teens crazy, that is when teens start to pull away from their families. And that is a normal and healthy thing because their friends are now becoming more of the primary social unit who are in that center circle. And maybe the parents are pushed out to like the first circle outside or something like that. Or, I mean, some teens do stay very close their whole life, but it is normal to see that little bit of a switch there. And then as you move into adulthood, I mean, friendships continue to be important. Often people will switch their focus to cultivating a romantic relationship. And then, depending if you choose to have kids, if you're able to have kids, you are then recreating sort of a new family unit in which you are that primary social unit for your children. And so it continues. So, this is all to say that it is very normal to have friends that are only there for a season, or to realize as you get older that, you know what, maybe my relationship with this person, maybe one of my parents is not healthy. It is not having a good effect on my mental health. And I know that there's a lot of family expectations and cultural values and pressures that can complicate that.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, it doesn't do most people good to try to maintain close relationships that are not serving them.
Yeah, absolutely. That tool is really helpful because let's say the person at the grocery store really upset you. So then you can go back to your target, that bullseye, and say, hey, this person's not actually close. It's not really a relationship that I'm going to try and solve or invest in. As adults, the people from our family may or may not be the people who are in our closer circle. And so we can kind of choose where to place them. We see them at Thanksgiving and Christmas, maybe, but then beyond that, we're not really pursuing more relationship with them. And that's a healthy place for those individuals to be in our life. So I think basically this tool is helpful in helping us categorize our relationships and also put people in the appropriate type of relationship with us.
It's a really important point, Kathleen. And I think it's about giving yourself permission as well to have people maybe transfer out of one category into another one, right? But as we get older, we might realize, okay, my values, my mental health are not aligned with what this person is. We might have people in our family who are not the people that we would necessarily choose to be close to if we weren't related. And I know, depending on different family expectations or cultural values or things like that, it sometimes can be very difficult to decide, okay, I'm going to keep this person at arm's length, or I'm going to set some boundaries for this. But I mean, the research is pretty clear that our mental health is helped by having those clear boundaries and being able to navigate those relationships according to our own deeply held values and goals, and not according to what somebody else thinks should be the case.
You're right. So I think this is in case where, natural relationships such as family are relationships break down, right? Or relationships have conflicts. And to create a sense of safety for ourselves, sometimes we do need to put up those walls. I've had friends who, with their parents, they've had to say, hey, we can phone each other once a month, or you can text me once a month, right? Like I'm setting rules here because otherwise we've gotten into patterns where it's been really unhealthy and it's not safe for me in the sense that it's taking up too much of my emotional reserves and my mental energy. And I don't have that time and energy to give to you right now because I have my own life. I have my family, I have my kids, I have my dog, whoever else I need to be spending that energy on. And so I don't want to push you away because I still care about you. But this is a healthy amount of communication for us. And I need you to respect that. I think where we're going with relationships and the good, the bad, the ugly is that if it's good, by all means, right? Like keep them close and
lean into it.
right, lean in and really invest in those relationships. And that's going to be really beneficial to your mental health. It's going to give you a sense of belonging, a sense of trust. I mean, just having someone to laugh with is so positive, right? Having really positive shared experiences and meaning making, carrying on traditions together, all those things are really positive and they give us such a good sense of ourself and our outlook on our life, right?
Absolutely. And going back to something you said a couple of minutes ago, Kathleen, about people sometimes, moving between categories, I think it's important to remind ourselves as well that even with friendships, sometimes people, they're there for a season of our life and then that time passes. And it doesn't mean that we are a bad person or they are a bad person. There doesn't have to be necessarily a big fallout or conflict or anything like that. Sometimes people are in our lives for a short time or a long time that ends, and that's That's okay.
I lived out west for a few years, and one of my mentors out there, she would always say, friends for a season, friends for a reason, friends for a lifetime. Those were kind of her categories, and how she would describe her friendships. Because the reality is, some friends are here for a short time. Like the friends I had in university, I had amazing friends. I still have dreams about bumping into them, and I'm just giving them big hugs, and I just like love them so much, but they're not in my life anymore, right? So those are friends for a season, friends for a reason. I've had really great friends who, in a moment of trouble or crisis in my life, they've been there, they've been helping, they were that shoulder to cry on. They helped me fix my car when it broke down in the middle of nowhere, right? For those moments, for that short time, I really appreciate them. And they know I'm not using them. They were just, compassionately giving. And I just really like drew on that friendship in that reason moment. And then there's the friends for a lifetime. And honestly, as a busy mom, I really appreciate that there are people in my life who, even though I might only reach out once a year or once every 3 years, or they're lifers for me, right? We pick up where we left off.
Exactly. That's what I always hear from clients is,
Mhm.
sometimes they'll have somebody who they're very close to, and it's that similar sort of sentiment of no matter how much time has passed, it's like no time has
Yeah,
passed at all.
exactly. And connecting with those lifer friendships. It's like, here's someone that I've known since I was a kid or since I was a teenager. We spent summers at camp together. And now as adults, our lives have gone different directions. When we get back together, it's just so good for the soul, right? Having those people that, it feels like coming home almost. And I really love that we can have those like different types of friendships or relationships. So yeah, that was something from that mentor that she herself was a friend for a season. And I really appreciated, going on walks together and just enjoying that type of relationship.
Wow, I love that, Kathleen. Friends for a season, friends for a reason, friends for a lifetime. And there is research showing that there are a limited number of relationships, especially close relationships, that we can physically and effectively maintain at any given point. I think that speaks to the sort of like the innate nature of relationships, that they do change and they do transition, right? It can be challenging, of course, to say goodbye to friendships or relationships that aren't serving us, but we do get to keep the positives from the things that we gained out of those relationships as well. So I think trying to hang on to that and still giving a little bit of space for the grief, for the anger, whatever other feelings might come up when remembering those relationships.
You're right. And I think part of therapy, or even just having conversations with people who are currently close to us, is being able to reflect on that and say, my relationships have shifted as my life has shifted, as I have developmentally changed. Right. So, for example, I'm in crazy mom season, as are you. And the number of relationships that you can maintain while also holding down a household and while raising children is it's limited. And so making friends as an adult is tricky. I find, just in my life, this is where we're at right now. I'm always saying hi to other parents at school and I'm getting their numbers. But then in the back of my mind, I'm going, when am I ever going to have time? I really like this person. I can see us being really good friends. Besides birthday parties or the occasional school event where I see them, when am I going to have time to foster this relationship? So I think some of it is also just checking in and recognizing our own capacity for relationship. Like you said, at any given time, there's a limit to how many relationships that we can uphold. And so that's where coming back to the concentric circles, the bullseye, it's recognizing, who do I have capacity for in my life right now? It might be your really close friends, or in the season, it might only be your family with the occasional visit to a friend. And that just might be where you're at right now. When I was in newborn stage with my babies, I remember having moments of like, I have no friends, like feeling like that. It was also during COVID, so I also couldn't see friends. I remember just saying to my husband, like, you're my only friend. You're literally my only friend. Because during that season of our life, that was just the reality of where we're at right now, right? And we leaned on each other heavily. And there were times where we drove each other crazy because we were leaning so heavily on each other. In an ideal world, it would be healthy to have friendships outside of the home, or at least one friend outside of the home to see occasionally to kind of share the love a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was anticipating, I know that having a newborn can be very isolating and lonely. These are the things that I had heard at that point. But I anticipated, I'm going to go to like mommy and me classes. I'm going to go to the library. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
meet other moms of newborns. I'm going to make friends. And I mean, I don't know if that was a pipe dream to begin with, but it definitely had a wrench thrown in it by COVID. There were none of these groups. There were no options. So it was, my daughter was born a couple weeks before the big March 2020
Mm-hmm.
lockdown.
I remember that.
And it was, my husband and myself and the baby. And I mean, in some ways, I wouldn't trade those memories for the world. It was a very unique and special time that is never going to happen again, right? Of just
Yeah.
the three of us. But there is very much a sense of, oh, I feel like I missed out because I don't have those mom friends now, or I didn't have as
Mm-hmm.
many sort of organic opportunities to build those friendships.
Yep, absolutely.
So I can imagine there's probably a lot of moms and maybe dads out there as well who have experienced that in the past few years and are maybe nodding right now and thinking, yep, that resonates.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, you and our kids are pretty close in age, so we're both having babies during COVID, right? And I think there are moments where I could really lean into the sweetness of the simplicity of our life. It's like, hey, I've got my kids and I can really just enjoy them and we can focus on being a family right now. And I was so glad to have them too. I know there was people who were very isolated during lockdowns that were living alone and just they relied on, virtual interactions basically. My heart just goes out to those people and, just knowing how lonely it was for people.
And I mean, really, we could do probably a whole podcast series on the impacts of COVID on relationships, right? Both the relationships people already had, the ones that maybe they lost or didn't get the opportunity to form. I mean, especially I look at, kids in school and my heart just breaks for them, right? Like when I was a teenager, my friends were my life. I can't imagine, not being able to see them and interact with them in person every single day. But I think that also, and I mean, I don't really have any hard numbers to support this, but I imagine a lot of people anecdotally would agree with me that COVID has also changed the way that a lot of us relate to others and the way that we build relationships. And a lot of that is unfolding right now. So we're going to see in some of the coming years as well the impact of that on mental health.
When we're talking about our mental health and relationships, having really good friends, it's like something good for our soul. It just feels right. It feels whole. And it does, I think, beneficially pour into our mental health.
Well, it does. And it sort of creates opportunities as well for positive experiences, positive memories, connection, fulfillment, all these things that we know are ingredients of good mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the flip side of that is if your relationships are not healthy or if you're struggling within communication or asserting boundaries within a relationship, it can have a very negative impact as well.
And the reality is, you don't have clients coming in because they want to tell you all about the amazing relationships and how well they're going. A lot of times when you're talking about relationships in therapy, it's because something's gone sour or something's confusing or someone doesn't know how to navigate a relationship. There's a pressure or there's an expectation, whatever it might be from the other party in that relationship. So then how do you explore those relational dynamics in therapy and how can that affect your client's mental health?
Sometimes when clients come in, they know that something is wrong, but they don't necessarily recognize that the issue maybe lies at least partly within one or more of their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Kathleen might call me the relationship guru. I'm not here to say I know everything, but sometimes when I'm listening to a client and they are explaining to me what somebody has said to them or done to them or what, the interactions within their relationships look like, sometimes it is my role as a therapist to say, hey, what that person is doing is not okay, or you deserve better than that, or this is psychological abuse.
Right.
Sometimes people they need that outside perspective, right? None of us can see it clearly when we're in the middle. So that can also be helpful to have a therapist there to recognize, hey, there's a problem here. Let's explore it a little bit more, explore how it's impacting you and see if there is a decision to be made. Is there a conversation that needs to be had with this person? Is there a relationship breakup that needs to happen? Do we need to move somebody from an inner circle to an outer circle?
Yeah, exactly. And even if it's not a conflict that's happening, just looking at myself and things I've experienced, sometimes there's grief there. not necessarily someone has passed away, but maybe there's a friendship that has been lost for some reason, whether it's by distance or some other reason. And that loss of relationship, we don't even realize how it's affecting us, but we might be experiencing fatigue or depression or other mental health realities that we haven't even connected to that relationship, right? Our relationships can sneak into our mental health. I think that's where taking the time to reflect and be honest with ourselves and also work on strategies for relationships, right, can be helpful. What would you say is one of the biggest strategies that relationships come back to?
If I had to do it in one word, I would say communication. And probably a lot of people would not be surprised by that. I think a lot of people know communication is, the key to good relationships. But the problem is, what does that look like? There's a few things that come to mind for me right away. One is this idea of supportive listening versus active advice giving. Not to overly stereotype anybody, but there is a pretty clear trend where women in general tend to gravitate more towards this sort of supportive listening, right? Just letting somebody vent, maybe giving them a hug if they want it, showing them empathy, that sort of thing. Whereas, again, not everybody, but statistically, men tend to be more instrumental, active. Oh, here's the problem. Here's what you should do. The problem, and I'm sure many people can relate to this, is that if somebody is looking for supportive listening or vice versa, and the other person is not giving them that, it can be a very frustrating conversation and not one that is fruitful for the relationship or for even managing that situation at hand. So I will often encourage clients, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship or a family relationship, to really open up that line of thinking with the other person and just make it a normal thing to ask, are you looking for advice or do you just want to vent? Or letting the other person know, hey, I really just need to get this off my chest. I'm not really looking for solutions or anything, versus, hey, what do you think I should do? And that can clear up some of those misunderstandings and really help people feel like they're being heard in the way that they need in that moment.
Yeah, I like that.
So that would be one, important communication tip that I would put out there. Another really important thing to remember is that when we get into fight or flight mode, so that's when our nervous system has sort of been activated, right? Maybe our heart rate has increased, our breathing has increased, we might be a little sweaty, a little jittery. These are also symptoms that happen with anxiety because that is the result of the activation of the fight or flight system as well. But if we are in fight or flight mode, one of the things that happens is that our prefrontal cortex, which is, the part at the front of our brain that is sort of responsible for a lot of those higher order functions, and being logical, being rational, it kind of goes offline a bit, which means that if you were having a conversation or a confrontation with somebody, whether that's a partner, a friend, parent, child, whatever it looks like, if one or both of you is stuck in fight or flight mode, it is not going to be a productive conversation. It just physiologically cannot be. And so another thing that I encourage clients to do is to sort of normalize within their relationships the idea that you can press a pause button. If you're getting worked up, if the other person is getting worked up, you are not going to be able to hear each other. Yeah. Probably even if you were saying the exact same thing to each other, you wouldn't hear it. So it is very important to to take that step away. You sometimes hear that old advice, Kathleen, I don't know if you've heard this advice before about, never go to bed angry.
Oh, yes.
And that's just not like a lot of, old wives' tales or adages. That's just not true. Because if you try to stay up late, in that combination of being tired, being, physiologically worked up, it usually just makes the conflict worse. It's better to separate, to do some self-soothing, self-regulating, whatever that looks like, and coming back to it later on, maybe even the next day or a few days later when you're both feeling calmer.
Right. Yeah, because I think that the saying, don't go to bed angry, the idea is that when you let your emotions kind of fester, then it can actually make things worse in the long run sometimes. But on the flip side, you're having a disagreement with someone and you're just trying to like put a bow on it and get rid of it without actually giving the other person the space to really say what they need to say, or, get to the bottom of something, then sometimes that can also be just as damaging. So I think just giving the appropriate space. One that Lindsay likes to say is, don't fight past 10 p.m. for couples, because he's like, you're not going to sleep, and then you're going to wake up grumpy, and then, you're
and then
going
it's a
to,
downward
it's a
spiral.
downward spiral. You're exhausted, and then you're going to have a bigger fight tomorrow. Like, it's just going to exacerbate the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And my mom had one similar, Kathleen, actually. I think it was, she was like, don't tell me anything that'll upset me after 8 o'clock at night. So you had to time it very carefully, right? Past 8 o'clock, she doesn't want anything that's going to make her worried or disturb her sleep or potentially lead to an argument. And I mean, I think that I respect her for setting that boundary, right? That was the right thing for her mental health and for her sleep, and helped her ultimately be, a better mom, wife, friend, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Communication is so powerful, whether it's positive or negative, right? And it plays so much into our emotional well-being and our mental health. Obviously, there are times where we just need to give space to whatever the disagreement is. But are there any tools or tricks that often work? Any things we can use, repair attempt, that may actually speed up that process of healing and reconciliation in a relationship?
Giving some space to some of these conflicts definitely is a good idea. But what happens when eventually you do have to, come back to the issue at hand, or it comes up again? And there's a couple of good techniques that I like to share with clients. One of those is this idea of using I statements. And this is used a lot in, assertiveness training, communication training, boundary setting, things like that. And the idea here is to sort of avoid having any overgeneralizations or global criticisms of a person. It's usually not helpful to tell somebody, oh, you always do this, or you never do this, or you're a, insert name calling here. It is much more effective to frame things in terms of your own experience and your own feelings, because then that is less likely to make the other person feel defensive. The formula, I guess, as it were, is to state the feeling, the problem, and the solution. I feel disrespected when you check your phone during dinner. I would like you to not have your phone at the table at dinner. Very clear statement. You're giving the problem and the solution. You're not just saying, oh, you do this thing, now fix it. And like I said, less likely to make the other person defensive. So again, stating the feeling, using the I. So I feel this, as opposed to you do this or you make me mad. Stating the problem, stating the solution you would like, or sometimes you might not have a solution at hand, but inviting the other person to collaborate with you on that.
Yeah, I think just having a simple recipe to communicate, it creates clarity. It lets the other person know what I'm feeling, because they have no idea half the time why I'm upset. We talked about feelings in the last episode, and Lindsay was saying how it's good for us to practice using one word to state our feeling, and then letting that other person know, hey, this is the thing right now that I'm experiencing.
Absolutely. And it is so important to also, check back in with the other person that they are understanding, that you are being understood the way that you want to be. And one example of a technique that can be helpful for this is what I've heard referred to as steel manning. It's kind of the opposite of straw manning. So if you make a straw man argument, it's basically misrepresenting somebody's argument and saying, oh, you're wrong because of this, when you're kind of purposely missing the point of what they're trying to say. So the opposite of that, rather than making a man or a person out of straw, would be to make one out of steel. And what this might look like is one member of the partnership talks, shares their feelings, while the other just listens. This is person A's time. And then person B has to say back to person A in the best possible light, like giving full benefit of the doubt, being on their team, this is what I hear you saying. And then person A is able to say, you've got it. You see exactly where I'm coming from. Or, hey, you're really misunderstanding this key piece, which is going to, lead to a bigger argument. Yeah. So being able to do that on both sides and really take that approach of, I'm going to argue for this person, kind of switching perspectives a bit, can be a really helpful technique and take some of the animosity out of more difficult conversations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And knowing too, like, we're complex and we are diverse. The way that I'm experiencing things versus even the people in that closest inner circle, they can't read my mind. So this is a chance for us to discuss things and work it out and hash it out. And sometimes there's a lot of back and forth. I'm saying this and you're repeating it back, but it's not the thing I meant. So then I need to say it again. And then you're repeating it back. And we're doing that until we both feel like that communication is happening clearly. You're really hearing me. I'm really hearing you. That takes space. This might be a walk you go on or a drive. It's not going to happen in the middle of dinner time with your kids screaming. That's not really the time and space for it. And I recognize I'm just speaking to my own life. We don't always have that time and space to properly give the attention that we need to the conflicts that we're having. What advice would you give in that kind of scenario, Andi, where, we have a lot of clients coming in who are commuting. And so the time that they have in their kitchen with their wife is like so limited. Can you think of any strategies that are just really beneficial, even when we're not able to hash those things out or we need to delay that for the meantime? What are some ways that we can kind of diffuse conflicts and give ourselves some breathing room in the meantime?
Well, I think scheduling conversations is sort of an underrated tool that sometimes it's good to know that, okay, this is just on hold for now. We're going to keep doing our thing, running the household, taking care of the kids or the pets or just ourselves. And we are going to come back to this later.
Right.
That also gives both members, or maybe there's more than two, if it's like a family situation or a friendship situation, it gives everybody a chance to process a little more. It's another difference between people, right? Some people are, and it tends to happen more with extroverted people where they are a little bit, I don't want to say quicker on their feet necessarily, but they will, right? They just want to get this sorted out now. They don't want to wait. They just want to talk. Maybe they say some stuff that isn't even necessarily what they mean, but they're just sort of, they're trying to continue engaging. Again, not always, but often introverts will need a little bit more time. They tend to process more internally. They need to go off somewhere and think about things and then figure out what they want to say. And sometimes even, writing it down, whether it's journaling for yourself just to get your thoughts out, or, I'm a big advocate of writing a letter to somebody, whether it's just for your own catharsis, maybe you never send that letter, you just burn it or destroy it. Or sometimes if there's a difficult conversation that we need to have, I see this a lot with my teenage clients where maybe there's something they want to communicate to their parents, or there might be something you want to communicate to a partner that you're nervous maybe that you're not going to get your point across, or that you're not going to say everything that you want to say, or that it's going to get interrupted, or whatever that is. And a letter kind of helps because you get a chance to sort of make sure that it is giving the message that is important to you. And then the other person has time to read it. Again, it doesn't work for everybody, but some people find it very helpful to even use. It doesn't have to be talking, right?
Yeah.
Or it can be like a letter that then leads to a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the idea of scheduling because then it's putting it on the back burner, but it's still making it a priority. You're not just brushing someone off.
I do see it a lot. And I've been guilty of this as well, where an argument or a discussion becomes more about like winning or losing, or like being right or wrong, versus what I think is the healthier situation within a relationship would be that you're both on the same team, which is to come to an understanding or an agreement, right? It's not about I'm right, you're wrong. It's okay, we as a unit obviously have an issue here. How can we get on the same page?
Yeah, exactly. So it's not me against you. It's, hey, we both have different ideas and our ideas are conflicting, or our actions maybe. And so then how can we put it out in the middle and try and objectively sort through it together, right?
Yes, absolutely. It can be difficult to see other people's point of view, right? Especially if that's not something that we routinely need to do. Like, for example, as a therapist, it's something I obviously have to work very hard at every day. I might have more opportunity to do that than somebody who, is not in a human helping field. But I think anybody can become good at it with more practice. And one strategy for practicing is to try coming up with alternative explanations or viewpoints for why people act the way they do or say the things they do. And it doesn't even have to be, the correct hypothesis. It's not really about being right or wrong. It's really just about stretching your brain a little bit, being a little bit more flexible, right? So maybe you jump to the conclusion of, oh, he said that because he wants to hurt me. That might be true.
Yeah.
To be fair, a lot of the time, the things that people say have more to do with them than us, though.
Yeah.
So we might practice coming up with something else, some other hypothesis of, oh, well, maybe he had a tough day at work, or maybe he's, displacing his anger onto me or something like that, which again does not necessarily make it acceptable. And it's something that can be talked about, but it's much easier to come at it from a place of, hey, how can I help support you right now versus I hate you, you're a jerk.
Yeah. And I like what you said about the language of being on the same team. I've found that so useful and helpful in either disagreements or even opportunities where you're supporting someone and they might not feel very ready to be supported, right? But just saying, hey, I'm on your side and I want to work for this relationship. Just saying stuff like that, right? Just affirming. It's like, hey, we haven't had a chance to really hash this out yet. We've got that later on the schedule this week. But in the meantime, I'm going to be kind to you. We're going to show gratitude to each other just for simple things like, hey, thanks for taking out the garbage, or thanks for that cup of water you poured for me. And trying not to fight, like try and have a discussion instead. And there is a difference, I think, between fighting and discussing. Discussion can be very proactive, and it can be very healing and can actually create stronger bonds with the people that we love and trust, right? It's saying, hey, I trust you enough to bring you into my feelings, to explain my thoughts to you. And that's going to create better relationships in the long run.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And it reminds me as well of the importance of actively nurturing fondness and admiration for your partner, right? I mean, humans are biased towards the negative. And so we have to sort of be proactive about trying to introduce some positive to cancel out or to balance out the negative a little bit. A lot of us might be more likely to dwell if, say, our partner or our friend has done something that upsets us. And I mean, there can be value in processing that a little bit and maybe making a decision. But it is equally, if not more important, to also spend time thinking about what you love about them, what you like about them, about having, these good memories together or specific strengths that they have that you appreciate. You have to actively cultivate that within your mind as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like the idea of giving people the benefit of the doubt and recognizing that we're human and what it means to be human. I mean, we are flesh and bone, but we're also an embodiment of our thoughts and our feelings and our upbringing and our experiences and our outlook on life. And all these things are swirling around in each one of us. So then we're always trying to communicate that to other people. But the reality is sometimes there's going to be disagreement. Sometimes there's going to be misunderstanding. Sometimes we might be in a position where we need to say hard truth to people that we love, and that's uncomfortable. But then trying to do it with empathy and compassion and recognizing I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. We're complicated. And I want to work through this together with you. It can be a really good starting place for healthy relationships and moving forward in our own mental health and well-being, and also potentially the mental health and well-being of the people in our inner circles. Andi, I feel like we could talk about this all day long. I'm really grateful for the time you spent in the studio. This is Beyond the Session, brought to you by Reset Counseling and Psychotherapy in Barrie. If you have any questions about what you heard on the air, or if you would like us to dive deeper into a topic, you can email us at resetbarrie@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.